But to begin with, I want to let you know who we are and what we're doing here tonight. So we are Foundation Learning. We're an SAT, ACT tutoring and test prep firm dedicated to helping students maximize their scores while improving their college profiles. So tonight's webinar, and the reason that you're all here, is to learn about how to study for the SAT/ACT. Let me just talk about our agenda a little bit. So first and foremost, I'll introduce our wonderful panelist on the screen, and then I'll let her take it from here. We'll discuss what is the SAT/ACT, understanding the ACT/SAT, creating a study plan, effective study techniques, and then we'll leave some time at the end for question and answers. Right now, we're looking at about half an hour for the actual content webinar part, and then we'll allocate another 15 minutes at the very end to your question and answers. As you can see, there's a chat panel as well as a Q&A only panel. Either one is great. Throughout the course of the webinar, please let us know if you have any kind of questions, and we'll make sure to get back to you, hopefully by the end of this webinar. As well, it is recorded, so you should be receiving a copy in your email that you can review later on. Send it to your friends, your family, your parents at a later date as well. So with that being said, Marina, I'll give you the floor from here if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Yeah, sounds good. Thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Marina, and I am one of the counselors that works with students at Quad, and I help students throughout like the different processes associated with getting ready for college and thinking about what you want to do, etc. I personally went to the University of Pennsylvania, where I studied at the Wharton School as an undergraduate. So I did their business program, and upon graduating was really involved with the alumni interviewing program. So I had the pleasure of interviewing a lot of students and staying connected in that way. I then went on to do my graduate degree many years after, but went on to go to the University of Chicago and study at the Booth School of Business. So a lot of like business school experience here. At the University of Chicago, I was on the admissions committee, the student admissions committee, and really loved like getting to take part in like the reading process of essays and applications and packets, and also was involved as an alumni interviewer. So that's a little bit of background about my own kind of experience. And today, excited to talk to y'all about the SAT/ACT, especially, given there's kind of a lot of news about it these days. People are starting to talk about it quite a bit. So we can go ahead and dive in to what is it. Yeah. So what is the SAT/ACT? They are college entrance exams. They're administered by two different kind of like organizations. The SAT is administered by the College Board, and the ACT is administered by the American College Testing. Excuse me, I'm getting over a little respiratory thing here. But the purpose of the tests is to figure out how students are doing in terms of their readiness for college. And the way that they're going to judge that is based on your proficiency in math, reading, writing, and if you take the ACT in science. Although the SAT doesn't specifically include science, like some of the ways that they ask questions are very similar. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. But this is a very helpful tool that colleges use to figure out how ready a student is to perform well at the college level. Every school is really different, obviously. Sometimes grades are very different. Grade systems are different. The SAT, ACT, it's the same test, so it's just another tool that they can use as they evaluate students. And in some ways, it can be a little bit easier for comparison. All right, we can go ahead to the next one. Yeah, so we'll deep dive into like what these tests look like and what to expect from each of them. So the SAT will have a reading and writing component and then a math component. Excuse me. Each of these is just a little bit over an hour. Reading and writing, you'll have 54 questions, math, 44. So in total, It's a long test, and we'll talk about how to study for it, because you really want to prepare in like the real environment of like having to sit there for that time period and not being able to like get up and get your phone and take a break and things like that. So it's good to just have like an awareness of what to expect in terms of time and number of questions. It's going to take 130 more minutes and almost 100 questions. We can go ahead to the next one. Thank you. So the first section is reading and writing. There are 27 questions in each module, and those go for just a little over 30 minutes. The way that the questions are broken down is there are operational questions and pretest questions. So for reading and writing, each question is going to be paired with a passage that you have to read. It's going to be like typically around 150 words or a little bit less than that. And there are going to be different types of formats that you have to read. And in this sense, some of it is sort of similar to like the science section even of the ACT, because you're essentially like reading something and then trying to analyze it and answer questions based on that. So there will be different types of formats to expect. You could see poems, graphs, charts, like a passage, lists, all kinds of different things. That's why it's really important to do a lot of practice as you're getting ready, because you want to make sure you feel comfortable with all of the different formats and nothing comes as a surprise. Go ahead and go to the next one. Yeah, so the way that they're kind of broken down is there will be, excuse me, craft and structure questions. Then there will be questions that are about information and ideas that you have to process, standard English conventions. So that'll be some of those grammar questions that we'll want to prepare by kind of like becoming very familiar with the rules, being able to evaluate like sentence structure, things like that, and then expression of ideas. And let me just pop in here quick. Yeah, so, all right. That'll be the reading section. All right. So a variety of questions. Really the best way to like get familiar with each of these is to take a practice test. We'll talk more about what that looks like. But as you can see, it's kind of broken down like pretty evenly into these different sections. It'll vary. And you want to just really get like as much practice as you can in each of the different formats. But we can go ahead on to the next one where we'll talk a little bit about math. Math will be 44 questions. It'll be a little bit longer, and you are able to use a calculator during the test. But you want to make sure that you can do like the basic math and make sure that you're able to kind of like write out the basics and you don't have to rely on your calculator necessarily the whole time, because some of that will cause you to use more time than you need. All right, go ahead and switch over to the next one. Yeah, so this is really going to be focused on the things that you've learned in school. It shouldn't be anything new. In fact, some of it is maybe stuff that you've done kind of a long time ago, and you're just going to have to go back and review just to freshen all of that up in your mind. But it'll be split between algebra, advanced math. Then you'll have like some problem solving and data analysis questions where data will be provided to you and you'll have to kind of answer some questions based on that. Geometry and trig. So lots of formulas that you're going to have to remember. Again, it's like all about practicing and making sure that you're figuring out which of these sections is kind of the one that's most challenging for you or the one that you need the most refresh on. You know, if you just took like an advanced geometry class and that stuff is nice and fresh in your brain, maybe that's all good, but you haven't done algebra in a while and you'll have to go back and kind of get prepared, just see what the format of those questions is, and get a lot of practice in, especially around like algebra and advanced math, because there are quite a few questions around those. We can go ahead to the next one. The ACT is a little bit different, particularly in that it has science as well. So it has an English section, 75 questions, and you get 45 minutes for that. It's similar in some regards to the reading and writing section of the SAT in that you're going to get different passages and essays to read, and you're going to have to go through and answer questions about those. Then you'll have the math section, again, like relatively similar to the SAT, 60 questions, 1 hour. The part where, and then you have reading, and then we'll sort of circle back to the part that's like really the biggest difference. The reading section is going to have 40 questions, and that'll be 35 minutes. And then finally, you have another 40-minute period where you're going to be focusing on 35 science-related questions. This is going to be kind of, in some ways, like similar to reading in the sense that you're going to be given like some context, and you're going to have to analyze it and look at data, answer questions. So it's not completely new, and you don't necessarily have to have like incredible science skill. It's more like the ability to process information and analyze it. Let's see. All right. Excellent. Thank you. And so as you can see, the ACT is a bit longer than the SAT. It's going to get you to almost a 3-hour period. You'll have the longest part is the math. Then you've got English and optional writing, reading, and science. And we kind of talked about like the number of questions in each, but it's a bit lengthier. But some students prefer this test. It's also important to kind of look at like what schools you're looking at. A good thing to do, especially kind of early on as you're thinking about starting to study for these tests, is to take a practice test of each of them and kind of get a sense for which of them you might be more comfortable with, just as like a starting point without even having studied at all. All right, we can go ahead and go to the next one. Yeah, so creating a study plan is super critical. And I think the thing that's really important is recognizing that your study plan and the person next to you's study plan do not need to be the same. They do not need to be similar. You really, really want to make sure that you're being cognizant of your own study habits, your strengths and weaknesses as you develop a plan. And this actually really applies to the whole college application process. Like self-awareness is very important. You need to know, am I a sprinter? Am I a marathoner? Do I like to do I procrastinate until the last minute and I study really well under pressure? Or do I like to do a little bit every day for months in advance? And if you are a procrastinator, I highly recommend not procrastinating on this, but you can still take into consideration that you work well under pressure and kind of like maybe more confined times. Just scooch that time up. So it's okay to be a sprinter. It's okay to say, okay, I'm going to study super hard for 2 weeks. But make sure that you're leaving that the 2 weeks that you need, and you're not leaving it for the very last minute. But the first step is figuring out what your goals are. A really good way to do that is to just take a practice test and figure out how you do on it without any preparation. The one thing I would say is make sure you take that practice test in as close a setting to what the real deal would be as possible. Because environment is actually like very important when you're test taking. You want to make sure that you're, doing it in the time constraints that are going to be replicated in the test environment. You want to make sure you have the same materials that you would be able to have during the test. And once you've done that, you take a look and see like, how did I do on each of them? You also want to make sure you have a sense like which one might be necessary for a specific school. But take a look, see how you did. The first test is not meant to make you upset or like, oh my gosh, I have way too far to go. Like even a little bit of practice is going to get you a long way, but this is going to help you figure out where you need to focus your practice. most of the different testing materials that you can find online and books will help you narrow down, oh, you got like X, Y, and Z wrong. That means you need to focus in on this area of study. And make sure that you make a plan based on that. So you want to make a plan based on where you need to do the most work, where you need to do the most review. Figure out too, like, are these sections that I can sit with myself and just practice, or do I actually need somebody to help me like relearn this or learn it for the first time? And as you think about that, you really want to set some goals for yourself, right? Like what is the score that realistically you want to achieve, and at what time, right? One thing to keep in mind too is figuring out like when you want to take the test and potentially leaving yourself an opportunity to retake it. All right, we can go ahead to the next. Yeah, so when you're thinking about that schedule and the prioritization, you want to make sure that you identify your test date, but I also recommend like making sure that there's another test date afterwards, just in case, that still meets your schedule. There are a couple of reasons that I recommend making sure you have enough time for like potentially 2 tests. One is because you just never know when, like me, like a couple weeks ago, I got pneumonia, which is such a strange thing for me to think that I somehow came down with, but my kids bring home a lot of germs. And for 1 week, I was completely useless, and it was totally unexpected, right? So you just don't know if that kind of stuff will happen or whatever other thing in your life will come up. That's one. And number 2 is I often hear of students, and like I've worked with students who are like, I know I'm going to do super well on the math. The verbal is really hard for me, or vice versa. Let's suppose that's on the SAT, and they get in there and they rock the reading and the verbal section, and then they're super disappointed by their math score, and it's like not even anywhere near what they got when they did their practice tests, or vice versa, whatever it is, right? And the nice thing is that you can retake it and get kind of the combined score. Once you know, I've got this part down really well, like you can take it, and if one of the sections doesn't work out the way that you hoped or expected it to, you still have an opportunity to boost that score by taking it again. So the point of that all being, make sure that as you set your schedule, you're kind of leaving room for at least 2 test dates before you need to submit your results. And some study time in between those 2 test dates as well. So once you've got that, work backwards or however you like to do your schedule, but make sure that you've got like a regular schedule. You figure out, again, are you a sprinter? Are you a marathoner? Are you going to split it all over a period of 2 weeks? Are you going to do it over 6 months, but a little bit at a time so it's not overwhelming? Figure out what works for you. Ask yourself the questions of, okay, let me think about a project that went really well for me. How did I prepare for it? Did I put a lot of like time constraints on it, and that just helped me to be really focused and creative? Or was I very like detailed about making sure to do a little bit each day? Was I a big like morning studier or a nighttime studier? Those are all things that you definitely want to just be very cognizant of, because if you're just sitting down, this is one thing that I see so much, and it makes me very sad because I know high school students are not getting enough sleep. But one thing that I often see is students like getting in front of their SAT or ACT study guides at 11 at night and trying to do stuff, and all they're really doing is just staring at the book. Like, no need. If you are not a night person, do not waste your nights trying to study, because you're not actually accomplishing anything, right? Like, you need to figure out if you're a morning person, a night person, afternoon person, what is that time of day when you can focus, and make sure you're very cognizant about not wasting time, because you all have very precious little time. So make sure that if you're taking that time to study for the SAT, that it's actually productive. Just because you sat and studied for 40 hours does not mean you learned a lot, like if it wasn't productive and efficient. So sorry, I'll get off of my soapbox here, but just important. All right, so you want to figure out your method of studying, right? Whether you're going to do it independently or you're going to get some help, figure out what kind of resources you want to use, books, online, etc., tutor, and get all that together and kind of make a confined plan, right? You don't want to always be adding something new to it because then it's never ending. Just make your plan in advance and commit to doing that and get started. And the one thing too that is helpful to note, like if you did a practice test and you did awesome at one section and it was easy peasy, like lemon squeezy, you do not need to spend a ton of extra time doing that. Really focus on the places where you feel like there's a weakness or just need to refresh your memory, and go to those places. And then at the end, once you're feeling ready and confident, go back and review everything. But don't spend too much time on the stuff you already know. Again, like this is about efficiency, especially with how busy y'all are, these days. All right, so we can go ahead to the next one. Thank you. Yep, so we talked quite a bit about all these different things, but it's very important to just be aware of all of the other things you have going on. And that's why another helpful thing is to start early. Your junior year, like sophomore year, you were so busy, you were taking hard classes. You're probably, taking harder classes than you've ever taken before. You're taking a lot of them. You're starting to take on leadership responsibilities and different extracurricular activities. So be very realistic about what you can achieve. Like I said, if you're just staring at a book instead of sleeping and you're not actually like learning anything, just go to sleep, right? Like you don't need that. You need to figure out a way that you can incorporate this into your calendar without burning out. And that can be really hard, but my take on this is that we all have like a lot of wasted time in our schedule. I know I do. Even just like the amount of time I spend, I don't know, like on my phone or watching a show or whatever, like those things are all really good for relaxation at some point, but they're also things that we might need to give up or limit during this period of our lives when things are just really busy. So make sure you're still getting some kind of recharge, but also don't like overload yourself so much that you're not sleeping and you're going to have, like a nervous breakdown before this test because you haven't slept in 3 months. Very important to stay healthy. All right, go ahead. Next one. This section will be focused on some study techniques. All right, so for the reading and writing section on the SAT, you want to practice active reading. So what does that mean? We're taking notes. We're kind of like maybe underlining, excuse me, having our own like note-taking convention, thinking about potential questions. You don't necessarily have to read everything like in order. People have different reading strategies, so figure out what works best for you. Vocabulary building. This is something that I think is actually like if there are any folks in the audience that are even a little bit earlier in school, I think this is such a helpful thing. If you even do just like one new word during dinner every night with your family or in the car or something and just have like a habit of that, it's going to help you so much not to have to memorize all these things as you're getting prepared and super busy as kind of an older high school student. Time management is another thing that you're going to need to practice, right? Because this is not a take as long as you need test. It's not a be super careful and revisit every question. Like if you can, awesome. But the reality is that you're going to need to work efficiently. And so you really want to practice doing that. And the other study tip, especially for reading and writing, but also applies to math, is figure out the question types. You're going to notice similarities between the questions. And you're going to start to notice patterns about how to respond to those, how to think through those. Sometimes it can be helpful to like really group them and say, okay, I'm going to practice like 10 questions that are similar to that. That can just be very helpful in terms of like forming the patterns and the way of thinking and a framework in your head for how to address them. especially since the reading section can sometimes feel like a little bit like there's not necessarily like there may be two answers that feel like they could be possible. So you want to really develop like a pattern for how you're going to narrow it down. Math, first studying for math, you want to definitely understand all the concepts. So as you go through your practice test, make a note of anything that is challenging and you need to review. Problem solving skills, again, similar to reading and writing, you're going to want to like look at the different question types and figure out how to approach each one. There's kind of like a finite amount of question types. And so if you keep practicing and there's a type of question that's really hard for you, you keep practicing, you're going to end up developing this framework for being able to answer those. Practice with official materials. This is super, super helpful. Go back, take like old tests. They're available. It's the best way to see what the test really looks like. And the best way to just go through the exercises, give it a try, see what the answers are, how they figured them out, and definitely review any mistakes that you've made. And one thing that I also want to highlight is don't spend time on the stuff you already know, but do refresh yourself like right beforehand. So first figure out, your weaknesses or the opportunities for you to refresh and places that are challenging for you, gaps in knowledge potentially. But do make sure that you go back and review the stuff that was easy for you too, because sometimes what happens is, okay, you take the practice test, algebra is like totally fine, it's easy breezy, but then you spend so much time focusing on the other stuff that you kind of just like blank on the algebra at the last minute. So just make sure that you've gone through and like refreshed, you feel confident going in, because the knowledge is in there, but you just want to feel the confidence too. Right, we can go to the next slide. All right, ACT study tips. A lot of these are very similar, right? With English, you want to be like a grammar police person. Make sure you know all those rules. You want to practice with the timing in mind, with the time constraints. Practice analyzing passages, again, like being an active reader for English and reading. Those skills like apply across the board. And practice with official materials. It's always going to be the best way to get a feel for the test. Math. Make sure you know how to do your like basic mental math. Question types, just like with the SAT, make sure you understand the concepts, just like with the SAT. So really the same study tips are relevant here. And then with the reading section, similar to what we talked about on the SAT, make sure you're being an active reader, figure out what those strategies are for you. Everybody has kind of a different way of reading a passage actively. There are a lot of tips too within some of the study books. Make sure that you're being efficient. Sometimes the passages can feel boring. Maybe it's not about something that you're super interested in. Don't let your mind wander, like get in there, focus on the point at hand, try to think like, okay, what are they trying to tell me here? What is the main point of this essay or passage? What like arguments are being presented? Ask yourself those questions so that you are really being efficient in your reading and you're not just like staring at the page. And again, question types, just as with any of these tests, the question types are going to be repetitive. So if you can read a question and be like, I know what kind of question that is, it's going to give you the confidence to be able to say, okay, this is X type of question, and this is how I approach that. All right, we can go ahead to the next section. For science, you're going to want to practice your data interpretation skills. So these are a lot of things that you're going to learn throughout school. But again, just practice with like official materials. Make sure that you can read efficiently and kind of figure out like, okay, hypothesis and what's going on here, and ask yourself questions as you're reading, and think ahead a little bit so that you're knowing what to kind of look out for. as you prepare to read the questions too. And sometimes folks will read the questions and go back. It's all good too. You got to figure out what strategy works for you. The writing section is going to be optional, but essay structure. So this is very much like what you learn all throughout high school. You want to practice writing prompts. Do not assume that you know how to write an essay just because you've done it a million times. You really want to practice with these prompts. The reason being, we don't typically have a time constraint and this kind of high stress environment to have to write a prompt. And we typically have other resources that we can leverage for inspiration. This is not the typical essay writing environment. So do make sure to practice and take advantage of an opportunity to get feedback from others. It's really the best way to make sure that you're not looking at something with just one point of view. In all of life, I feel it's very good to talk through your ideas with others and see how they're perceived by others, see if they're easy to interpret, see if your argument is clear. So really take advantage of peer review and, take turns with a friend. Or if you can find another resource to parent or teacher or mentor, older student, really, really good because they'll notice things that you just can't from your point of view, which is totally normal, but having that extra opinion is very helpful. All right, go ahead to the next one. Yeah, and that is all I've got, but I am happy to try to answer any questions. Oh, there you go.
There you go. I'm back in here. Thank you for that. Thank you very much. That was some incredible information, and I hope our audience found some value in that. So I actually have a couple of questions that were previously sent in. So I think maybe starting with those, and that'll give our audience, our live audience, a moment to kind of come up with their own questions. I had somebody ask, when is the right time to actually take the SAT or the ACT? And what are your thoughts on that?
So my thought on when is the right time is trying to do it early. So if you have the opportunity to kind of do it during getting ready during the summer, before your junior year, that can be a good opportunity to really get ahead of it. That's kind of what I recommend. I know it's not always the most feasible, and I'll see people taking SATs into senior year, but I think getting ready summer before junior year can be a great opportunity. Sometimes you need a little bit more of that academic material that you'll cover during junior year. So perhaps springtime, junior year, and summer there is also good. You kind of have to judge based on your own knowledge and preparation. I think this is also a function of me being a marathoner. I like to start things super early so that they don't feel as overwhelming. So I would suggest even starting on some of that vocabulary practice early on, maybe doing the types of math that you are already familiar with early on, just so that it's not something that becomes super overwhelming at the end. But I think most folks would probably be taking it just after junior year. Would you agree?
I think so. But then again, I'm also a marathoner, so I like to plan ahead. Plan ahead, start slow, pace myself, and make it happen. So I have a couple more questions in here. Not necessarily in the chat, but from our prior little poll we did. Is it better to have my score sent directly to my chosen schools, or should I wait to see the results and then send them myself?
That's a good question. I think this depends a little bit, especially in the current environment where some schools require SATs, other schools, SAT or ACT, other schools are test optional. So really depends on the school that you're looking at. I think there's not anything there's not really like any huge benefit to sending it directly. And you can take advantage of kind of, you know, seeing your score. I feel like it takes like a little bit of anxiety off of you to see it first, figure out what your plan is, if you're going to take it again or something like that. But, you know, there's also not like a huge loss to sending it. If you do end up applying to a school that has a required test, you're going to have to send all of your scores anyways. So it's not like a huge issue, but personally, I think there's some kind of like weird mental stress relief by just getting your scores first and then being able to make a decision about what you do from there, especially if you're applying to test optional schools.
Awesome. One more, and I think you touched base on this a little bit. I've taken the SAT a couple of times now, and I'm still not happy with my score. I'd like to retake it at least one more time. Do colleges view multiple attempts negatively?
That's a very good question. I think, again, like this depends. It's going to depend on a lot of different factors. So they're taking a look at your academic history and your extracurriculars and your essays and your recommendations. And your test scores are just a part of that whole package. So, you know, I don't want to say like, don't take it like 12 times, right? That's probably going to flag something, especially if, I mean, again, this totally depends, right? Like, let's suppose you are an A+ student and you have never gotten a B before in your life. And then for some reason, the SAT or the ACT is just really challenging for you. And you're, you know, maybe you're having test anxiety or something like that. And you have to take it a few times to get to where you need to be. That's okay. Like, in context, right? That story goes, I'm really strong academically and something was freaking me out about the SAT or something in my study habits or whatever. I needed to figure it out and I was able to achieve it. If you're taking it though to increase your score by like 10 points, it's probably not worth it. And also recognize that you might actually do worse the next time. So I guess like you know, unfortunately, I don't have like a yes or no answer. It really depends on the other elements of your application packet, and whether you need to make some kind of like specific point with the SAT. But it's very like case by case, I'd say.
I think
certainly if it's like a lot of times, yeah, people are going to wonder. But there's also opportunity to explain that stuff.
Of course. So it could go either way. So we had a question come in from our live chat. Is sort of talking about what's more popular, the SAT or the ACT for colleges.
Okay. Yeah, I'm not sure if this is like specific to, to ACs, but I haven't worked with that many students in like the California like school region that are totally focused on those. So I don't want to answer that part of the question because I would have to look into that. Most, I would say it depends on the type of program that you're applying to. I do see a lot of students leaning towards SATs, but it really also depends on what school, what program, and what your own strengths are. Because ultimately, if you're very good at like ACT type of testing and you can get a really great score on that, but for whatever reason the SAT is not working for you, like that can be a good way to go, assuming the college accepts it.
Awesome. So somebody asked, is there any resources and or prep for the ACT that are free? Yes, there absolutely is. I definitely recommend, and this is sort of a moment where we step in, on our website, I'll put it in the chat shortly, we have a ton of free resources for you, whether that's study schedules, whether that's practice quizzes you could take. There's tons of resources on there to sort of help with this portion, whether that be ACT or SAT. Let me see if there's any more questions in here. Marina, I don't think I see any questions. I have one more question for you, actually. So just your biggest piece of advice to students and or parents. I think it's really important to kind of loop in parents who have a student or who have a child or the child themselves who's getting ready to take the SAT or ACT.
Yeah, I have two. So sorry, I have two pieces of advice for parents or students that are getting ready to take the SAT. The first thing is remember that this is just a piece of the whole application packet. This process is already stressful. You do not need to put more pressure on yourself around your exact SAT or ACT score. Remember that you have your academics, your recommendations, your essays, everything that you do outside of school. If you are, stressing about like the 10 points on your SAT, don't do that to yourself. It's not necessary. Yes, like a lot of schools are very competitive, but the reality is that you got to focus on all of these things and really figure out what your story is and figure out how you can kind of differentiate yourself. And I think spending that time and making sure you're really focused on your essays and building relationships with your teachers so that you have like that strong recommendation that's unique and finding those like exciting leadership opportunities that are fun for you and exciting for you and challenging in a good way are just as important. And putting too much pressure on any one thing just feels like very counterproductive. And I hate, seeing students super stressed out and not sleeping over or over any one of those things, right? We're all just humans. Like my biggest piece of advice to people going through the college process is to try to be open-minded about where you end up, in the sense that if you go to a school that you weren't expecting to go to, or maybe for whatever reason you don't get into your number one dream school, if you have a good attitude about it, you are going to have an awesome experience. You are going to be super successful. You're going to figure out like how to make that work for you. This is not the end all be all. And so my number one piece of advice is just like, don't let it like stress you out too much. My second piece of advice is to start early. If you are building that knowledge and that practice over time, you're going to be stronger in your classes, because a lot of the skills that you learn as you prep for these tests are valuable for classwork as well. You're going to be more confident, and you're just going to be in a better position overall. So even if you are, a sprinter and you work well under pressure, like try to create those sort of artificial pressure situations like early on, maybe in like small doses or something like that. Like, okay, this 1 week I'm going to focus on vocabulary and I'm going to go super hard on that. Figure out what works for you, but do try to start early. I'll just take away some of the stress too, because school does not get easier as you get to junior and senior year.
Couldn't have said it any better myself. So it looks like we are at 45 past. I don't want to intrude into anyone else's evening. So just want to take a moment to thank you, Marina, and thank our wonderful audience for being so attentive and just being a part of tonight's discussion. I hope everybody has a fantastic evening, and thank you again.
Good luck.